I'm Yvonne, 62 years old, and recently retired after teaching mathematics for 4 decades in Boston public schools. Throughout my career, I pinched pennies and saved diligently to ensure a comfortable retirement. Never did I imagine my only son, Andrew, would hand me mortgage papers for a house I didn't agree to buy. Even more unbelievable was being served with a $450,000 lawsuit from my own flesh and blood. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, leaving wounds that may never fully heal. If you're watching this from the comfort of your home, please subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're from. I need to know I'm not alone in this nightmare that started with a simple Sunday dinner invitation. Teaching was more than a job to me. For 38 years, I shaped young minds in Boston's public school system, finding fulfillment in helping students discover the beauty of mathematics. My classroom became my sanctuary, especially after my husband Thomas died in a construction accident when Andrew was just 7 years old. The loss of Thomas thrust me into single motherhood without warning. One day, we were planning our future together. The next, I was planning a funeral and figuring out how to raise our son alone. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses and 6 months of mortgage payments. Reality hit hard and fast. I had to make it work on my teacher's salary alone. Every decision I made revolved around providing for Andrew. During school years, I tutored after hours 3 days a week. Summers weren't for relaxation. I taught summer school and picked up administrative work to make ends meet. New clothes, those were for Andrew. Vacations. We took modest road trips to nearby attractions when I could save enough. My own needs always came last. Despite the financial strain, those early years with Andrew were precious. He was a sweet, thoughtful child, with his father's dark curls and my analytical mind. We became a team, just the two of us against the world. I still remember his homemade birthday cards, the dandelion bouquets, and his proud face when he brought home good grades. Things began to shift during his teenage years. The sweet boy slowly transformed into someone who measured worth by material possessions. I noticed his growing embarrassment about our modest 2-bedroom home when friends visited. He began comparing our lifestyle to his wealthier friends, questioning why we couldn't afford brand-name clothes or the latest gaming systems. "Mom, Jason's parents just bought him a car for his 16th birthday. He complained once. "They're not even rich. They just know how to manage money." The comment stung. I tried explaining our financial reality, but my words fell on increasingly deaf ears. Andrew couldn't see the careful budgeting that put food on our table and kept a roof over our heads. He only saw what we lacked. When college application time arrived, Andrew set his sights on prestigious business schools with hefty price tags. Though I encouraged him to consider state schools where his good grades might earn scholarships, he was determined to attend Northeastern University's business program. "This is my future, Mom," he argued. "Don't you want me to succeed?" Those words became his weapon of choice. How could I argue against my child's success? So I took a second mortgage on our home and committed to paying his full tuition, promising myself I'd find a way to make it work. I picked up weekend administrative work at the school district office, canceled our cable subscription, and learned to stretch every dollar even further. Andrew thrived at Northeastern, joining business clubs and making connections. When he called, it was usually to request additional money for business, attire networking events, or spring break trips his friends had planned. Each request came with assurances that these investments would pay off in his future career. After graduation, Andrew landed an entry-level position at a financial investment firm. I was so proud watching him in his new suit, embarking on his career path. Finally, I thought he would understand the value of hard work and financial independence. It was at this firm that Andrew met Natalie. According to Andrew, she worked in client relations and came from a good family in Connecticut. Their romance progressed quickly, and I first met her at a restaurant dinner where Andrew was visibly anxious for us to make a good impression. Natalie was strikingly beautiful, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a dazzling smile. She was polished in a way I never had time to be, with manicured nails and clothes that screamed expensive taste. Throughout dinner, she spoke about exclusive restaurants, her parents' vacation home, and her extensive travels. While she was perfectly pleasant to me, I sensed she was assessing my worth based on external factors. "Yvonne, you must be so proud of Andrew," she said. "He's absolutely brilliant with investments. Everyone at the office thinks he'll be running the place someday." I smiled and agreed, though I wondered if her interest in my son was genuinely about who he was or who she thought he could become. Still, Andrew looked at her with complete adoration, and his happiness was what mattered most to me. Their engagement came 6 months later, followed by plans for a wedding that sounded more like a coronation than a simple ceremony. The guest list exceeded 200 people, most of whom I'd never met. The venue was a historic mansion with waterfront views. The dinner would feature a 5-course meal with wine pairings. When the conversation about wedding costs inevitably arose, Andrew approached me with a spreadsheet. "Mom, we've calculated everything, and we think it's fair if you contribute $25,000, he said casually, as though discussing lunch plans rather than a sum that exceeded my annual disposable income. "Andrew, that's most of my savings," I replied, stunned. "Mom, this is my wedding day. You've always said you wanted the best for me," he countered. "Besides, Natalie's parents are covering the majority." Caught between financial responsibility and not wanting to disappoint my only child on his important day, I reluctantly agreed. I liquidated an investment account I'd been growing for 15 years and handed over the money, telling myself this was a once-in-a-lifetime expense. After the lavish wedding and honeymoon in Bali, I noticed a shift in our relationship. Phone calls became less frequent. Sunday dinners at my house dwindled from monthly to quarterly. When they did visit, conversations revolved around their achievements, purchases, and social connections. My life as a teacher seemed to bore them, and questions about my well-being felt perfunctory. 4 decades of teaching had finally brought me to retirement. My pension, combined with careful investments and Social Security, meant I could live comfortably, though not extravagantly. I had plans to finally visit Italy, volunteer at the Literacy Center, and perhaps take some art classes. For the first time, my life could center around my own dreams, rather than just survival and providing for others. It was during this transition that I began noticing Andrew and Natalie's increased interest in my financial situation. Their questions became more specific and frequent. "How much is your pension exactly?" Andrew asked during one phone call. "What's the total value of your investment portfolio now that you're retired?" came another query. I attributed their curiosity to Andrew's financial background and maybe some concern about my well-being. I had no idea these questions were laying groundwork for what was to come. The invitation to Sunday dinner at Andrew and Natalie's downtown apartment came unexpectedly after several weeks of minimal contact. Their building was one of those new luxury high-rises with a doorman fitness center and rooftop lounge. Every time I visited, I marveled at how different their starting point was from mine at their age. "Mom, we're making your favorite pot roast," Andrew said on the phone, uncharacteristically enthusiastic about having me over. "Natalie's really looking forward to catching up." I arrived with a bottle of wine I could barely afford, wanting to contribute something to the evening. Their apartment showcased their prosperity. Open concept, with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city, designer furniture that looked more stylish than comfortable, and kitchen appliances that probably cost more than my first car. Natalie greeted me in what appeared to be casual attire, but which I recognized as the kind of casual that comes with three-figure price tags. She air-kissed my cheeks and took the wine. "Oh, how thoughtful," she said, examining the label before setting it aside. I noticed she opened a different, presumably more expensive bottle for dinner instead. Throughout the meal, the conversation kept circling back to my finances in ways that felt increasingly deliberate. "So, now that you're fully retired, you must have quite a nice nest egg," Andrew commented, between bites of roast that was admittedly delicious. "I have enough to be comfortable," I answered cautiously. "But you've been saving for what, 40 years?" Natalie chimed in. "That's impressive discipline." Andrew nodded enthusiastically. "Mom was always great with budgeting, living below her means. That's how she built her wealth." Wealth. The word struck me as odd. I'd never considered myself wealthy, just financially secure after decades of careful planning. The conversation shifted to real estate, with Andrew declaring the current market was perfect for investment. "Property in the right neighborhoods is guaranteed appreciation," he explained with the confidence of someone who'd never experienced a housing crash, especially with inventory so low right now. I nodded politely, not mentioning that I'd lived through several market cycles and had seen many guaranteed investments fail. After dessert, Andrew and Natalie exchanged meaningful glances before Andrew cleared his throat. "Mom, we actually have some exciting news to share," he announced, reaching for Natalie's hand. "We found our dream home." Natalie immediately pulled out her phone, swiping through photos of an enormous colonial-style house with perfectly manicured grounds. "It's in Wellesley Hills," she gushed. 5 bedrooms, 4.5 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with marble countertops, a swimming pool, and even a separate guest house. "It's in the best school district," Andrew added meaningfully. "Which is important because, well, we're thinking of starting a family soon." My heart leapt at the mention of grandchildren, something I'd privately hoped for, but never pressed about. "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "The thing is, Mom," Andrew continued, his tone shifting to something more serious, "we're going to need your help to make this happen." A small alarm bell rang in my head. "My help? What kind of help?" "Nothing we need to get into tonight," Andrew said quickly, exchanging another look with Natalie. "But we have some papers we'd like to discuss with you next weekend. It's a really time-sensitive opportunity, and we don't want to lose this house." The evening ended with promises to meet again the following weekend. As I drove home, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. What kind of help were they expecting? Babysitting future grandchildren, decorating advice. Something told me it was more significant than either. The next morning, I received a call from my friend Barbara, who had known Andrew since he was in elementary school. "Yvonne, I ran into Curtis from your old neighborhood yesterday," she said without much preamble. "He mentioned something odd. Said he saw Andrew at the golf club, and Andrew was bragging about buying some mansion because his mother was finally putting her money to good use. I thought you'd want to know." The uneasiness I'd felt the night before crystallized into dread. I thanked Barbara for the information and spent the rest of the week trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Surely Andrew wouldn't presume access to my retirement savings. Surely I had misunderstood, but deep down, I knew what was coming. The child I'd sacrificed everything for was now viewing my financial security as his resource to tap. The following Saturday arrived with gray skies and a persistent drizzle that matched my mood. I'd barely slept all week, anxiety growing with each passing day. Still, I drove to Andrew and Natalie's apartment, hoping my suspicions would prove unfounded. The atmosphere felt different immediately. Instead of the warmth of our previous dinner, the air felt charged with expectation. Natalie's smile seemed tight as she took my raincoat. Andrew poured wine without his usual banter. The conversation through dinner was stilted, focusing on safe topics like the weather and local news. As soon as the dishes were cleared, Andrew disappeared into their home office and returned with a manila folder. "So, Mom," he began sitting across from me at their glass dining table. "About the house we showed you last week. We've actually already submitted an offer, and it's been accepted." "That was quick," I remarked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "When you find the perfect property, you have to move fast," Natalie interjected. "Especially in this market." Andrew nodded in agreement before continuing. "The total purchase price is $850,000. I nearly choked on my wine. The amount was staggering, more than triple what my own modest home was worth. "We've been pre-approved for a mortgage of $400,000, Andrew continued, "but we need to come up with the rest for the down payment and closing costs to avoid PMI and get the best interest rate." He slid the folder across the table toward me and opened it, revealing mortgage documents with highlighted sections. "We need $450,000, he stated matter-of-factly. "And we were hoping you could provide it as a gift." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "A gift," I repeated, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Well, yes," Andrew replied, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You've saved enough, Mom. It's time to help your family." Natalie leaned forward, her expression earnest. "We've already factored this into our financial plans, Yvonne. The sellers are expecting us to close in 45 days. The guest house would be perfect for you when you're older," Andrew added, as if offering me a consolation prize for parting with my life savings. "You could sell your place and move in there. It would be a win-win." My mind raced as I struggled to process what was happening. They weren't asking. They were telling me how my money would be spent. They'd made commitments based on access to funds that weren't theirs, and they were presenting it as though I should be grateful for the opportunity. "This is overwhelming," I managed to say. "I need time to think about this, to talk to my financial advisor." Andrew's expression darkened immediately. "What's there to think about? This is family, Mom. We need this house for our future children, your grandchildren." "I understand, but $450,000 is most of my retirement savings," I explained. "I need to make sure I can still support myself." "Support yourself," Natalie scoffed lightly. "You'll have your pension, and like Andrew said, you could live in the guest house eventually." "Eventually?" I repeated. "And until then, Mom," Andrew cut in, his tone increasingly frustrated. "We've already signed the purchase agreement. The sellers are expecting this to go through. We can't back out now without losing our earnest money." I felt a surge of anger cutting through my shock. "You signed a purchase agreement, assuming I would give you nearly $500,000 without even discussing it with me first." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Andrew and Natalie exchanged glances. "We thought you'd be happy to help," Andrew finally said, his tone suggesting I was the unreasonable one. "After all we've done for you." The statement was so bewildering, I couldn't immediately respond. After all they'd done for me, my mind flashed through decades of sacrifice, of putting Andrew's needs before my own, of working multiple jobs to fund his education. "I need to go," I said, standing abruptly. "I'll think about this and call you tomorrow." The drive home passed in a blur. Rain pelted my windshield as tears streamed down my face. Once home, I collapsed on my sofa, the full weight of what had just happened crashing over me. My own son viewed my life savings not as the security I'd worked decades to build, but as his entitled inheritance, available for his use even while I was still very much alive. The next morning, I called my financial advisor for an emergency consultation. He pulled up my accounts and ran the numbers. "Yvonne, if you withdraw $450,000 now, you'd not only incur significant taxes and penalties, but you'd be left with insufficient funds for your own long-term needs," he explained gently. "Based on average life expectancy and potential healthcare costs, you could easily outlive your money." "What if I just gave him part of it?" I asked, still desperately searching for a compromise. "Even half that amount would significantly impact your financial security," he advised. "Remember, you can't go back to teaching if you run out of money. Your earning years are behind you." His words confirmed what I already knew deep down. I couldn't give Andrew the money he wanted without jeopardizing my own future. With a heavy heart, I reached for my phone to make what I knew would be one of the most difficult calls of my life. "Andrew, I've given this a lot of thought," I began when he answered his phone Sunday afternoon. My voice was steadier than I expected, bolstered by the certainty that I was making the necessary decision. "I'm sorry, but I can't give you $450,000 for the house." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds before Andrew responded, his tone incredulous. "What do you mean you can't, or you won't?" "I mean I can't, without putting my own financial security at risk," I explained. "I've spoken with my financial advisor, and withdrawing that much would seriously compromise my retirement." "This is unbelievable," Andrew said, his voice rising. "After everything I've done, after all the years of being the perfect son, this is how you repay me, by refusing to help when we need you." The characterization was so far from reality that I almost laughed. "Andrew, I've supported you your entire life. I worked multiple jobs to put you through college. I gave you $25,000 for your wedding just 2 years ago." "That was different," he snapped. "This is about our future, our family. Don't you care about that at all?" "Of course I care," I responded, trying to keep calm. "But that doesn't mean I should deplete my life savings for a house that's far beyond reasonable need." "We've already committed to this purchase," he practically shouted. "We told the sellers, we had the down payment secured. What are we supposed to do now?" "I'm sorry you made commitments based on money that isn't yours," I said firmly. "Perhaps you should look at homes more within your actual budget." "Our budget included your contribution," he said coldly. "We've been planning this, counting on this. Natalie's already told all her friends about the house." The absurdity of the statement made my resolve stronger. "Andrew, I raised you to understand the difference between wants and needs. No one needs an $850,000 house with a guest house and swimming pool." "Wow," he responded, his voice dripping with contempt. "So you'll happily let us lose our earnest money and look like fools because you're too selfish to help your only son. Good to know where I stand. I'm willing to help in ways that don't compromise my future," I offered. "I could perhaps provide a loan of $50,000 toward your down payment with reasonable terms for repayment." "$50,000. That's nothing. That doesn't even solve the problem," he exclaimed. "We need the full amount, Mom. Not a loan, a gift." "That's not possible, Andrew. I'm sorry." "No, you're not sorry. You're selfish. After all I've done for you, all the times I've been there for you." I waited for him to elaborate on these supposed instances, but he didn't continue that line of thought. "You've got 1 week to reconsider," he finally said, his voice frighteningly calm now. "Either you help your family, as any decent mother would, or we're done. Think about whether your precious retirement savings are worth losing your son over." The call ended abruptly, leaving me shaking. His ultimatum hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For a brief moment, I considered giving in just to keep peace in the family. But the rational part of me knew this would only be the first of many financial demands if I acquiesced. The following week was torture. Andrew sent increasingly manipulative texts, alternating between guilt trips and angry accusations. Natalie called crying, describing how embarrassed they'd be backing out of the purchase. Even Natalie's parents got involved, with her father calling to tell me that family supports family, and suggesting I didn't understand how real estate investment worked. Most painful were the messages mentioning future grandchildren. "I guess you don't care about providing stability for your potential grandchildren." One text from Andrew read, "They'll certainly hear about why they don't have a proper home." I stood firm, despite the emotional onslaught. After a particularly nasty voicemail from Andrew, I stopped responding altogether. Eventually, the barrage of messages ceased, replaced by complete silence that was almost worse than the attacks. 2 weeks of silence passed. I began to wonder if this estrangement might be permanent, a thought that kept me awake night after night. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a certified letter arrived. The thick envelope bore the return address of a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I signed for it, a sense of foreboding washing over me. Back inside my home, I sat at my kitchen table and carefully opened it. "Summons and complaint," read the bold heading on the first page. My eyes skimmed the document, certain there must be some mistake. But there was no error. I was being sued by my own son and his wife for breach of verbal contract in the amount of $450,000 plus additional damages for emotional distress and financial damages related to their home purchase. According to the complaint, I had repeatedly and consistently promised to provide this exact amount specifically for their first home purchase. The document cited numerous witnesses to these supposed promises, including Natalie's parents and several of their friends. I'd never made such promises, not once. The fabrication was so complete, so divorced from reality, that I briefly wondered if I was losing my mind. Had I somehow forgotten conversations where I'd committed my life savings to them? No. This was pure fiction, created to bully me into submission. With shaking hands, I called a lawyer friend who referred me to Patricia Wong, an attorney specializing in civil litigation. She agreed to see me that afternoon. "Unfortunately, this isn't as unusual as you might think," Patricia said after reviewing the documents in her office. "Family financial disputes often end up in court, particularly when substantial amounts are involved." "But it's completely fabricated," I insisted. "I never promised them anything." "I believe you," she assured me. "And fortunately, verbal contracts for such large amounts are difficult to prove, especially between family members. But we need to take this seriously. They've filed a real lawsuit that will require a real defense." She explained the process ahead: discovery depositions, possibly a trial if we couldn't settle. She also explained her retainer, in hourly rate figures that made my stomach clench. Even winning would cost me thousands in legal fees. Could I countersue for my legal costs? I asked. Possibly, but that would be a separate action after this case concludes, she explained. And collecting might be difficult. I left her office with a retainer agreement and a heavier heart than when I'd arrived. This wasn't just about money anymore. My own child was willing to publicly lie about me, to drag my name through legal proceedings, all to access my savings. As word of the lawsuit spread among mutual friends and family, I discovered Andrew had been laying groundwork for months. He'd told people I was becoming erratic with my money, that I'd made promises I was now breaking, that retirement had made me confused about prior commitments. Some friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with being caught in family drama. Others took sides, with a surprising number believing Andrew's version simply because it seemed unthinkable that a son would sue his mother without legitimate cause. My sister Judith called from Arizona, concerned after hearing rumors. Yvonne, is everything okay? Andrew told Robert that you're having memory issues and reneging on promises. That's absolutely false, I said, fighting back tears of frustration. I'm being sued because I wouldn't give him nearly $500,000 for a house I never agreed to help buy. Judith was supportive but worried. This isn't like Andrew. He was always such a good kid. I thought so too, I replied sadly. Through Patricia's preliminary investigation, I learned Andrew and Natalie had proceeded with the house purchase despite my refusal, taking out a much larger mortgage with unfavorable terms and a smaller down payment. They'd also secured a personal loan from Natalie's parents, apparently with my retirement funds, promised as eventual repayment. Further digging revealed a pattern of financial overextension. They had 2 luxury car leases, credit card debt exceeding $60,000, and had taken expensive vacations to Europe and the Maldives in the past year alone. Their lifestyle was built on quicksand, and it seemed they'd viewed my savings as the solution to their impending financial collapse. As the court date approached, my anxiety reached unbearable levels. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and found myself jumping whenever the phone rang. My doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication just so I could function. This level of stress isn't good for someone your age, she warned during a checkup where my blood pressure was alarmingly high. Is there any way to settle this matter out of court? I'd already tried. Patricia had made a final offer of $75,000 as a one-time gift with no admission of any prior promise. Andrew and Natalie's attorney had rejected it outright, countering with a demand for the full amount plus legal fees. They were gambling that I'd eventually cave rather than endure a public trial against my own son. They didn't understand that some principles were worth fighting for even at great personal cost. My financial independence, earned through decades of sacrifice and hard work, was one of them. The county courthouse was an imposing structure of stone and authority. I'd driven past it countless times, but never imagined I'd enter it as a defendant sued by my own child. Patricia met me on the steps, her confident presence providing some comfort. Remember what we discussed, she said calmly. Answer only the questions asked. Don't volunteer information. And most importantly, tell the truth. Inside the courtroom was smaller than those depicted on television, but no less intimidating. Andrew and Natalie sat at the plaintiff's table, both in expensive-looking suits, deliberately not making eye contact with me. Behind them sat Natalie's parents, their expressions cold and judgmental. Judge Harriet Simmons, A woman perhaps a decade older than myself, with silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes, called the court to order. Andrew and Natalie's attorney presented their case, first painting a picture of a son who had relied on his mother's repeated promises of financial support, only to have that support unexpectedly withdrawn after significant commitments had been made. Andrew took the stand, his testimony a masterclass in selective memory and fabrication. According to him, I had promised this money repeatedly throughout his adulthood, specifically earmarking it for his first home purchase. He claimed I had even suggested the amount based on my investment portfolio. My mother always told me that her retirement savings were really for the next generation, he testified smoothly. She specifically said that $450,000 would be set aside for when I was ready to buy a family home. Most shocking were his characterizations of my parenting. In his revisionist history, I had been emotionally distant, putting career before family, and had promised this money as a form of compensation for my supposed maternal failings. Mom always said this money would make up for the times she wasn't there. He claimed a statement so false, it took my breath away. When Natalie took the stand, she described conversations that had never occurred, including one where I supposedly reviewed house listings with them and confirmed my financial contribution. She spoke of dinners where I had allegedly discussed tax implications of making such a large gift, events that existed only in her imagination. Yvonne was enthusiastic about contributing, Natalie testified. She said her investment accounts were performing well, and that this was exactly what she'd been saving for. My hands clenched into fists under the table as I listened to these lies. Patricia placed a calming hand on my arm, reminding me to maintain my composure. When it was our turn to present, Patricia methodically dismantled their narrative. She introduced my financial records, showing decades of single motherhood struggle, the second mortgage for Andrew's education, the substantial wedding gift, and my modest retirement savings that would barely sustain me through my expected lifespan. Your Honor, Patricia argued, if Ms. Wilson had intended to give away more than half her retirement savings, surely she would have discussed this with her financial advisor. There is not a single email, text message, or witnessed conversation supporting the plaintiff's claims of a promised gift. When I finally took the stand, I spoke from the heart about my life as Andrew's mother. I described working summers and evenings to provide for him the sacrifices made to ensure he had opportunities I never had, and my genuine shock at being presented with mortgage documents for a house I'd never agreed to help purchase. I love my son, I testified, my voice breaking slightly. But I never promised him this money. I couldn't promise it because I simply don't have $450,000 to give without endangering my own basic needs in the coming decades. The cross-examination was brutal. Andrew and Natalie's attorney tried to portray me as confused, selfish, and unreliable. He questioned my memory, my motivations, even my love for my son. Through it all, I held firm to the truth, though tears sometimes threatened. The unexpected turning point came when Patricia called a surprise witness, Michael Donovan, Andrew's college roommate. Michael testified that throughout college, Andrew had often commented on my financial struggles and sacrifices. Andrew used to tell me how his mom worked multiple jobs to pay his tuition, Michael stated. He said she never took vacations and lived in the same small house to save money for his education. He was proud of her sacrifices then. When asked if Andrew had ever mentioned promises of money for a future home, Michael shook his head. Never. In fact, he told me his mom would need her savings for retirement, since she'd spent so much on his education. He said he planned to help her financially once his career took off. I glanced at Andrew during this testimony. His face had reddened, his jaw clenched tight. During closing arguments, Judge Simmons interrupted Andrew's attorney with pointed questions. "Counselor, why would Ms. Wilson promise such a specific amount years ago? And why is there no documentation of this supposed promise?" The judge's skepticism was palpable, and for the first time since receiving the lawsuit, I felt hope. After a brief recess, Judge Simmons returned with her decision. This court finds insufficient evidence to support the claim of a verbal contract. The plaintiff's case relies entirely on unsubstantiated assertions of promises that the defendant credibly denies making. Furthermore, this court is troubled by what appears to be an attempt to use litigation to pressure a parent into providing funds she clearly never committed to giving. She dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile the same claim, and denied their request for me to cover their legal fees. Relief washed over me, but the victory felt hollow. I'd won the case, but lost my son. As we gathered our things to leave, Andrew stormed toward me in the courthouse hallway, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed, as Natalie pulled at his arm. "You've chosen money over family. I hope it keeps you warm at night." Before I could respond, he added the words that would echo in my mind for months to come. "As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a mother anymore." They pushed past me toward the exit, Natalie's parents following with matching expressions of disgust. I stood, frozen, Patricia's supportive hand on my shoulder, having secured a legal victory that felt like the greatest personal defeat of my life. The first weeks after the trial were the darkest of my life, darker even than after Thomas died. Grief after death, while devastating, comes with social support and understanding. Grief from estrangement brings shame and isolation instead. I moved through my days mechanically, teaching myself to exist in a world where my only child had declared me dead to him. The house felt emptier than ever before. Photos that once brought comfort now stabbed with pain. I found myself talking aloud, sometimes explaining my side to an absent Andrew, arguments that would never be heard. Sleep became elusive. When exhaustion finally pulled me under, nightmares often jolted me awake. Dreams of Andrew as a small boy, lost and calling for me, but running away when I approached. I'd wake with tears on my pillow, reaching for the phone to call him before reality crashed back. My friend Barbara became my lifeline during this period. She brought casseroles I couldn't eat, sat with me through evenings of silence or tears, and never once suggested I should have just given Andrew the money. "You did the right thing," she would assure me. "Standing up for yourself isn't wrong, even when it costs you." 3 months after the trial, Barbara convinced me to attend a support group for parents estranged from adult children. Walking into that church basement meeting room was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. An admission that the situation might be permanent rather than temporary. Inside, I found a dozen others carrying the same invisible wound. Some had been estranged for months, others for decades. Their stories varied wildly. Estrangements over money, lifestyle differences, in-law conflicts, addiction issues. But the pain in their eyes matched my own. "The hardest part," said Eleanor, a woman who hadn't seen her daughter in 8 years, "is the social stigma. People assume you must have been a terrible parent for your child to cut contact. They don't understand how complex these situations really are." Others nodded in recognition. I found myself sharing my story, the words pouring out to these strangers who truly understood. For the first time since the lawsuit, I didn't feel defective or alone. Through the group's recommendation, I started seeing Dr. Marshall, a therapist specializing in family estrangement. Our weekly sessions became anchors in my unmoored life. What you're experiencing is a form of complicated grief, she explained during an early session. You're mourning someone who's still alive, but absent from your life. That creates a unique type of pain. Gradually, with professional help and peer support, I developed coping strategies. I created new routines to fill the Andrew-shaped hole in my life. I volunteered teaching math literacy at a community center. I joined a book club. I learned to sit with my pain rather than run from it. 6 months after the trial, I received a text message that sent my heart racing. Need to talk. Financial matter. Andrew. I called Barbara immediately, my hands shaking too badly to respond. What do you think he wants? I asked her. Nothing good, she replied bluntly. Not after all this time, without a word. My therapist advised caution. Before you respond, consider what boundaries you need to protect yourself. I waited a day before texting back a simple, "What's this regarding?" His response came quickly. Natalie and I are divorcing. Need money for attorney. Can you help? No apology, no acknowledgement of the lawsuit or estrangement. Just another financial demand. The audacity was breathtaking. After consultation with Dr. Marshall, I crafted a careful response. I'm sorry to hear about your divorce. I'm not in a position to provide funds for legal fees. I hope you find the support you need during this difficult time. He never replied. Through mutual acquaintances, I later learned that Andrew and Natalie's marriage had collapsed under financial strain. The house they'd fought so hard to obtain was in foreclosure proceedings. Natalie had allegedly discovered Andrew had opened credit cards in her name without her knowledge. The fantasy lifestyle they'd constructed was disintegrating. As my first year of retirement ended, a year so different from what I'd planned, I made a decision. I would take that trip to Italy I'd been dreaming of for decades. Not as an escape, but as an affirmation that my life would continue to have meaning and joy, despite this profound loss. Florence was everything I'd imagined and more. Walking those ancient streets, surrounded by art and history, I felt something inside me beginning to heal. I made friends with a Canadian couple and an Australian widow in my tour group. We shared meals and stories, creating connections that had nothing to do with my identity as Andrew's mother or my status as an estranged parent. For 2 weeks, I was simply Yvonne, a woman with interests, opinions, and value entirely separate from her relationship with her child. That realization was perhaps the most precious souvenir I brought home. Back in Boston, I expanded my volunteer work, developing a financial literacy program for high school students. Teaching young people about budgeting, saving, and the difference between wants and needs became deeply fulfilling. If I couldn't help Andrew understand these principles, perhaps I could help others avoid similar pitfalls. Through this work, I built a chosen family of friends and colleagues who accepted me as I was. We celebrated holidays together, supported each other through health scares and job changes, and created new traditions that filled the void family estrangement had left. 2 years after the lawsuit, I received a Christmas card from Andrew. Inside was a brief note. Thinking of you, things have changed. Maybe we could talk someday. I held that card for hours, emotions swirling. Hope, wariness, longing, and fear battled within me. I wanted reconciliation desperately, but knew it couldn't come at the expense of the hard-won boundaries I'd established. After careful thought, I responded with my own card. I would welcome conversation when you're ready. My door is open, but with the understanding that mutual respect must be our foundation going forward. We haven't spoken yet, but the card sits on my mantle, a small bridge across a vast chasm, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal with time. Looking back on this painful journey, I've learned that true love doesn't come with invoices attached. Real family supports each other's well-being, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is set boundaries, even when those boundaries cost us dearly. I've also learned that my value was never tied to what I could provide materially. The decades I spent believing I could purchase Andrew's love through financial sacrifice created patterns that ultimately damaged both of us. Most importantly, I've discovered strength I never knew I possessed. Standing firm against immense pressure, rebuilding a life shattered by betrayal, and finding joy again after profound loss. These achievements belong to me alone. If you've experienced similar betrayal from those you've sacrificed for, please know you're not alone. Your worth isn't measured by what you give, and setting healthy boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary. Have you ever had to stand your ground against loved ones who felt entitled to your resources? Share your story in the comments. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more stories of survival and resilience. And remember, sometimes the family we choose brings more healing than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to protect your own well-being even when it's difficult.